Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hope you're having an amazing day. In this video, I want to focus on Intel, specifically how their 13th and 14th generation processors will fare against both Zen 4 and Zen 5, discuss release schedules, and throw in some other stuff as well. There's a lot to get through here, and we're gonna, of course, first of all, listen to the message from this video's sponsor. And given all of this new hardware coming out, well, you're probably gonna want to get yourself a new Windows key, let's just be honest.
If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices.
So, I just want to start the video off by apologising if you guys can hear background noise, i.e. my AC. Sorry. I actually tried to record this video without it running, and basically I will die. I mean, you guys can see how pale I am. It's not going to work out well. You're just going to see me melt in the video. So it was either that, or you don't get the video because I'll probably just pass out before the recording session's over, especially with lights hitting me and so on and so on. Basically, the UK at the moment is going through our version anyway of a heat wave, and the humidity is like, you know, off the charts. So yeah. Kind of sucks, but British weather. What are you going to do, right? Anyway, let's first of all start with, I just want to go over some Raptor Lake information. Now, I know that Raptor Lake for many isn't as exciting, but I do have some info here, so I just want to quickly go over it. If you guys prefer, though, you can just skip, of course, to Meteor Lake onwards, as there has been a couple of very interesting leaks from Igor's lab, and also some stuff that I've personally been hearing. But let's just really quickly go over Raptor Lake. So, there has been, of course, some official announcements from Intel concerning Raptor Lake. I'm just going to throw them in here just for the why not factor. Up to double-digit performance boost. Note, this is not stating IPC, clock frequency, and so on. We'll get more into that in just a moment. Up to 24 cores, 32 threads, so basically the same as older Lake. Enhanced overclocking features, that tells us a lot. AI M2 module, and also that it's actually compatible, of course, with older Lake. Again, there's not a huge amount to really go through here with Raptor Lake, but it does offer enough of a gain, most likely, to give Zen 4 some trouble. The best way of really thinking of Raptor Lake is older Lake, but with some tweaks. It is not a from the ground up architecture, which is what we're going to get to when we talk about 14th and 15th generation stuff. But it does offer modest IPC gains, we'll discuss them specifically in a moment, and of course clock frequency and a few other bits and pieces. So broadly speaking, we are looking at 8 high performance cores and 16 Gracemont cores. The leaks have already confirmed L2 cache is 2 megabytes for each P core, so that's 4 megabytes as well for each of the cluster of E cores. L3 cache is 36 megabytes, this matches what of course leaks have already said. And clock frequency is possible up to 6 gigahertz, and efficient thermal velocity boost is most likely, doing this with select SKUs. DDR5 5600 MTS is supported, although the actual DDR4 variants are 3200. Now I do want to mention, as for performance here, and in regards to memory anyway, I've already put this out in a couple of videos, but I'm just going to quickly go over it here if you've missed it. Basically, DDR5, with the higher core counts anyway, that's probably going to be where the actual, difference lies. So the 13900K obviously has those additional energy efficient cores. Over the 12900K, it's basically double the amount. And obviously with the increases in clock frequency and all the other stuff, basically what you're looking at is most likely highly multi-threaded applications. So for example, if you're running like 3D rendering or things that basically eat tons of memory bandwidth, that's when DDR5 is probably going to start to pull ahead in performance. With that said, On lower variants or lower performance variants, so the 13400 for example, DDR4, especially if you're using fast memory anyway, it's probably going to be okay. But obviously your mileage will vary, and it will obviously heavily depend upon the application and, for example, what the latency of the memory is. So for example, it's an extreme example, but clearly if you're going to be pairing like even a 13400 or something with some slow ass 2400 MTS DDR4 memory with like the latency of like, you know, a kettle boiling between each time it does something, then that's not going to be good for anyone. So in terms of performance though, I've heard around 7 to 14% gains over what Alder Lake is capable of. And honestly, I do think that it's going to be a very interesting scenario versus Zen 4. I suspect Intel might, just might, have the multi-thread advantage. And this is where the switcheroo happens with the 14th generation and later. And we'll discuss that more in just a moment. Honestly, I don't really know what the situation is going to be longer term, because there is some very interesting stuff, of course. The fact that Zen 4 now has AVX 512 support, for example. We also have other things to take into consideration as well, like the Vcache Zen 4s. But those most likely are going to launch later next year, I think. It's probably going to be like Q1, Q2. Honestly, I've heard so many different time frames. It's going to depend on the amount of silicon AMD has spare, how competitive they feel the market is, and so on and so on. I personally think that it's going to be a very interesting scenario. I also just want to throw in that there have been a crap ton of rumors concerning, like, you know, AM4 getting Zen 4 and higher core count variants of the Vcache for AM4 and all of that. I think maybe at best it has been something that maybe AMD have experimented with internally, but I don't really think it's ever going to see the light of day. For example, let's just assume that we talk about the 7950X coming to AM4. It just doesn't make sense. Not even taking the technical stuff out of the equation, and there is a plethora of technical issues, but let's assume that AMD has the willpower, the ability, and they do technically, you know, have the ability to do this, and let's assume that they did want to bring a processor to the market from a technical perspective. Would it be actually even worth it when they're launching an entire new platform? Now, I do get that technically they would appeal to a large number of existing users, but at the end of the day, there has to be that line in the sand somewhere. So not only, of course, would they need to do a massive amount of like changes to the actual CPU itself, way more than I'm going to get into in this video because I've talked about it already, but I just don't think that AMD are going to do it. So this does mean that it's going to be a very interesting scenario, I suspect, for AM4 users who do want to upgrade. If, for example, you've got like a Zen 2 based processor or an alternative Intel system, Raptor Lake or Zen 4 is going to be a very interesting scenario. But I suspect many people are going to do something a little different. They're going to throw all of their cash into a high-end GPU. So, for example, a 4090 or whatever from AMD. And they're going to just keep their existing CPU, unless it's like really old. Because ultimately Zen 5 and, Meteor Lake are going to be really impressive. So let's now get into some Meteor Lake stuff. Now, I'm going to begin, first of all, with Igor's lab. Igor actually has some really good information, and they've actually got some block diagrams here. We're going to get more specifically into different things in a moment, but there is a new core architecture, P-cores, E-cores, and LPE cores. Just to be clear, this information is pertaining to the laptops. You can see that the P and H, so the higher performance ones, basically got up to 14 cores, whereas U goes up to 12 cores. There is XELPG graphics. Now, there was some confusion of the generation of iGPU, but I think this is correct. I think that basically, at least to my understanding, and I'm saying this from kind of like digging into my memory banks, but I remember one of my sources quite some time ago saying that Intel did something or major changes to the 14th and 15th generation. I think one of those was the iGPU. I may be misspeaking there, so I'm not saying that with 100% confidence, but I'm sure someone told me it at some point, or maybe it was a rumor floating around, but I'm sure I've heard it at some point. There is also VPU, which is AI acceleration, noise suppression, and so on. I'm going to get more into that in just a moment. Image processing unit, 4 times Thunderbolt, you guys can see what that is, and some other stuff as well. There is also a number of other things that have been added here. Meteor Lake is going to be aiming for the second half of 2023. Again, this, I just want to be clear here, is for the mobile. Interestingly, DDR5 5600 MTS, thank you for using MTS and not megahertz there, Intel. And also LPDDR5 is also supported up to 67 MTS. And 96 and 64 gigabytes of memory. Now I'm just going to skip over to Meteor Lake, some of the information that I've personally been hearing, as well as some info from Bench Life concerning the socket. Now, I actually was going to include a little more information on what I'm going to be putting into this video, but honestly, I just wanted to kind of discuss this at length because Igor put this information out. I was actually kind of waiting because I wanted to put some more info about Zen 5 and how things would be competing against one another. However, at the moment, I'm waiting for a source to confirm a couple of details. So I decided to hold back on some of that because I don't want to put some info out, you know, on the competitive side and then find out it could be incorrect. So I'm probably going to do an update maybe in a couple of weeks or so, or maybe earlier, depending. Anyway, let's get into it, shall we? So, the new socket has been confirmed by BenchLife from an actual diagram. It's 1851 for the socket. This is also being confirmed by a source of mine, although that's not too surprising. Again, BenchLife usually has pretty good information. And also we have a diagram which does lend some credibility. I was told that it's basically the CPU being connected via BGA, and that's 2551, and basically is an interposer, and voltage regulator. I don't have a whole amount of information on that yet, but yeah, it's apparently pretty similar in terms of socket size and so on to what Intel have already got, with like 1700, socket 1700, but there are some changes. Speaking of things that have changed, I'm told that IPC is around 15 to 20% on average over Raptor Lake. I want to stress, that's over Raptor Lake. Performance cores are around 15% gain. In best case scenario, I was told it's around 20%. E-cores are around 25%, again over Raptor Lake. There is a slight clock frequency regression. Around 200 megahertz is probably going to be expected just because of the changes in the architecture. I want to stress, this is predicted. We are not talking about final silicon at this stage, and that's putting it very, very, very mildly. So 200 megahertz is predicted. It could, of course, with final silicon end up being equal, or it could end up being positive, or it could, well, be a lot worse. But again, I'm pretty sure like 200 megahertz is a pretty safe assumption at the moment. So that's a regression, to be clear. That is not an addition, that is a regression. Core counts remain the same. So we're looking at 8 performance cores, 16 energy efficient cores. This is again compared to Raptor Lake, and remember Raptor Lake has also increased the number of cores it has. One source of mine did tell me it's 24 E-cores, but personally I don't think this is right, and I don't believe that I've got this information correct. VPUs, I've got a couple of examples from one of my sources regarding VPUs. They have a ton of uses basically, but they can do things like basically decoding footage, various codecs, voice analysis. It also allegedly does really well in applications like Adobe. And also the neural compute engine also works alongside 16 shave cores. Again, I'm not 100% confident in this information. I'm trying to find out more details on that. So I do actually have more info on that side, but I'm trying to do a little bit of additional kind of clarification for a couple of sources. But to my understanding anyway, it's actually a really impressive thing. It should do really well in mobile. Continuing, however, there is also support for 6400 MTS. This is for the desktop, although of course it can be overclocked further. And the SoC also features additional support for XeSS acceleration. Now, obviously that's because at the end of the day, it has iGPU built in, and obviously we know that Intel are pushing XeSS, which is its form of upsampling. I'm not 100% certain how its SoC implementation differs compared to that of the GPUs, but this is what I was told, that the CPUs have some additional hardware inside of it. I'm not 100% confident of that, but I'm just putting it in anyway, and then we can kind of figure out, a little more later on. But this is where things get quite interesting. Arrow Lake. So basically, Arrow Lake is the 15th generation. 8 performance cores, the number of energy efficient cores doubles, so now we've got 32. I was told that on average we're looking at a 45% increase in IPC over older Lake, that's the P cores. So this means it's about 20% improvement over Meteor Lake. I was also told that we're looking at around a 25% efficiency gain as well, but I just want to be clear, guys, this is a target. We're so far away from the actual release at this point. A source told me that the E-cores are extremely impressive, but yeah, they're not released yet. And the last thing I want to discuss in this video actually is another thing from Igor's lab, and it's basically just a small thing concerning the RTX 40 series. And this actually tallies up quite well with something that I was actually mentioning in a video a few days ago. So if you missed it, basically in a video from a couple of days ago, I was actually hearing that Nvidia have been testing an RTX 4070 with 12 gigabytes of memory. Now, since then, I actually got a couple of other DMs, and one of them was that a 4070 was being tested again with 16 gigabytes of memory, which is interesting because that was, I believe, an old configuration from Cop7 Kimi, but again, I was being told that that was being retested, and then I was also told that a 4080 exists with 20 gigabytes of memory. Now, according to Igor's lab, and I actually believe that this is the case, there has been an awful lot of testing, and basically Nvidia are just essentially going backwards and forwards at the moment, and I do not think that a lot of the specs have been locked in. I think it's much more likely that a 4070 will end up with 10 gigs, because I think Nvidia are basically reshuffling it to essentially replace the 3080. This is again what Igor's lab has said as well. But I would love for them to add more VRAM, because again, VRAM is always a good thing. I think it's going to depend, to be honest with you, on costs and yields and that type of thing. Like, for example, the yields of the memory controllers on the die and blah, 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 blah. I also suspect it's going to heavily depend upon the configuration that AMD are pushing. For Navi 31, I think it's got 24 gigabytes of memory. For Navi 32, which is obviously going to be kind of the mid-range, it's going to have up to 16 gigabytes. But up to is not the same thing as all of the SKUs have it. So, for example, AMD could fuse some of the higher-end cards, which technically speaking could have up to, 24 gigabytes of memory, and they could go to like 20. Again, this is just speculation. I do not know exactly what the final plans are going to be. I don't think that AMD or Nvidia are 100% locked in all of their specs for all of their SKUs yet, especially Nvidia. In fact, I think that much like Igor, the only, I do think, and again, I could be wrong, but I think the only SKU that's really kind of close to being locked in is the 4090. And then they basically use the 4090 as a way to kind of cut down all of the other products, again, based upon yields, production costs, and all of that stuff. I don't know. I think it's going to be a very interesting run-up to launch. I think that we're going to get quite a few surprises, not least of which is what the availability is going to be like. There are so many rumors, guys. There are so many rumors. I've had one source just swear to me that the RTX 40 and RDNA 3 are right on schedule. One person is basically telling me that Zen 4 is about to launch in September. Possibly the motherboards could appear earlier, allegedly. But I don't know exactly what that's about. I'm assuming it's going to be like some type of APU that they're going to be kind of pushing out on top of that. I haven't done enough research on that side of things yet. But yeah, basically, Zen 4 is going to launch in September, and then probably around October time, that's when AMD are allegedly going to be launching N31. And that's according to multiple sources. And another source is telling me that Nvidia are definitely going to be delaying the RTX 40 series, but I don't know. The main reason, of course, they may delay it is simply because of the oversupply of the RTX 30 cards, but I don't know. Personally, I don't think it's true at this point. Just speaking to whom I've spoken with, it doesn't seem to be. But the thing is, of course, Nvidia can make these decisions on a dime. And yeah, maybe, for example, they are not just delaying it for the inventory reasons, and this is speculative, this is not something I've heard, I'm just saying, but maybe Nvidia are like, you know what? We need a little more time because we are working on X technology. Just speculative. Let's say it's DLSS 3 or some update or some other thing that they require. Maybe the silicon is almost finished, but they want extra time for something else. There is a lot of moving parts, of course, and yeah, it's honestly too hard to know. I personally think that the things are still on schedule. I think we're going to hear, you know, some pretty solid information pretty soon about the 4080 specifications and probably some benchmarks. This is speculative again. I'm not saying that from the, you know, from someone's told me anything. I just think it's most likely at this point. We're getting really close. I'm sure it's going to be some crappy benchmark like actually the Singularity, you know, for God knows whatever else. It's like, you know, it always seems to be someone gets like a really early silicon and the first thing they do isn't run like, you know, Blender and some other things. It's going to be like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to use like CPU-Z and we're going to use it with like single channel memory. And that's like what some leaker gets hold of. You know, it just is what it is, right? Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. I think I've rambled more than enough. Again, I'm sorry if you've been hearing the AC in the background. With that said, take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.